Grace. We are in our second week of our sermon series towards a community of grace. This is a series that we come back to a couple of times a year, and it's just a space and a time for us to think about where we are and who we are as people and as community, and where we can stretch a little bit more. How can we be a little bit more welcoming, a little bit more full of grace, a little bit more understanding? And last week, Larry had actually sort of a fun topic. We're not going fun today. We're going to go a little bit more serious. And so I'd like to say that what I'm doing today is really just surface. This is the beginning of a conversation, and this is a really intense topic. And so we're just going to sort of go slowly and gently. So first of all, let me say I am not an expert on moral injury. There are no experts on moral injury. This is a relatively new area of study, and it came about because of military chaplains and psychologists at the VA and military hospitals getting really frustrated because they had soldiers coming to them needing help. And they had this list of PTSD symptoms, and it didn't fit. The people that they were seeing were obviously suffering from something that they had experienced in combat, and yet it didn't fit any of the boxes that they had. And so they started reaching further and reaching out into religious communities. And the Center for Soul Repair was founded by Reverend Rita Nakashima Brock, and I always have to double check his name because I say it wrong, the Colonel Herman Kaiser Jr. They founded the Center for Soul Repair with the purpose and intent of research and training and developing programs and pathways and systems to support moral injury. And so moral injury is really important and relying on religious communities because Jesus is our great healer, right? Jesus is our example of healer and healing, and Christianity and the church have this foundation to be able to help and support. But before I go further with that, I'd like to give you Rita Nakashima Brock's current definition of moral injury. This definition sort of keeps evolving as research and depth of understanding continues to unfold. So, moral injury is a response to traumatizing experiences when the existing core moral foundations of faith of a person or group are unable to justify, contextualize, and integrate those experiences so that meaningful relationship, hope for the future, and human flourishing can be sustained. It occurs in relation to experiences of extremity, moral ambiguity, and life threat. It results from committing, witnessing, imagining, or failing to prevent acts or events that violate foundational social and ethical taboos. And it manifests itself in moral emotions such as shame, guilt, remorse, self-condemnation, self-loathing, and despair. Now, most of the research currently that has been done around moral injury is within the military experience and combat soldiers and veterans. But that doesn't mean that they are completely intertwined and interconnected. Not every person who has served in the military is suffering from a moral trauma, and not everyone who's walking around with a moral trauma comes out of the military. That's just the context of our current at this second. So to sort of whittle what I read down really simply, a person who crosses that fundamental moral line creates a wounding in their soul. And when that trauma can't be reconciled with that core faith, the soul suffers and the person's life is sort of permanently impacted. Because our morals are our compass in life. They are a part of us that God created us with, and they're nurtured and grown within community. Our morality is built into our social systems. We learn them through all of the social processes we go through every day and in growing up. Through repetition, through stories, through rituals, and through our basic problem solving that we raise our children with and that we were raised with. And so our moral understanding, our moral behavior is actually primarily set by about age 5. And then what happens after that is just sort of added layers and added information until the frontal cortex is fully developed, which we now know isn't until someone is about 28 years old. So yes, parents, teenagerhood doesn't end at 18, it ends at 28.
29.
So behaving morally is encoded in our body. By the time we're 5, our body knows what's morally right and what's morally wrong. Our gut just knows it. And so when something happens later in our life that goes against that, we can't rewrite it. We can't rewrite our body's understanding of that gut and what's right and what's wrong. We have to figure out how to either make it fit or do something with it when it doesn't. So moral injury is not new. It's a new area of study, but it is not a new thing. It has been around as long as people have been around. But we haven't looked at it and haven't thought about it a whole lot. But there is a new hermeneutical lens that theologians and pastors are reading through, and that is because we have veterans who are going on to seminary and becoming pastors. And so these veteran pastors are reading the Bible through a hermeneutic that would be the lens that you read things through. I saw a couple people, that's a big word. The hermeneutics of the veteran. And as they read through the Bible, they are seeing that there are examples of moral injury throughout the Bible. And God engaging in humanity in that mess of moral injury, and Jesus engaging in moral injury, and Paul engaging in moral injury. And they're pulling those stories out and bringing them to light to help us understand what this is and maybe what we can do about it. And so this morning we're going to look at a scripture which I'm sure you have all heard and have heard used in different ways, and it's in Mark 5. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains. But the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he, Jesus, had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now, there on the hillside where a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushing down the steep bank into the sea, and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and at his right hand, and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood, and as he got into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. Now, this passage has been used in a lot of different ways to talk about healing, but it is Reverend Michael Yandel, who was also a veteran, that really looked at this through this lens of moral injury, and the first thing he really noticed as his marker that we're talking about military here is the identification of legion. Because a legion was a unit of the Roman army. So his saying to Jesus, "I am legion," is the equivalent of saying, "I'm in the army. I serve the Navy." He was identifying instantly with Jesus to tell Jesus who he was and what he was coming from. The other piece that's used as an indicator that this is dealing with Roman military is the setting, Gerasene. The county of Gerasene was an area that had been settled by veterans of the Roman soldiers. It had been given to them as a gift payment for their service to the empire. But this man isn't living within the community with other veterans. Instead, he is living outside of the community in the graveyard. He's living in the past and with the ghosts. And it's possible that this is because this military man is struggling with the things that he did in service for his empire. Traumas that he had committed, traumas that his unit had committed, that inside of him were continuing to be perpetuated, that he was living out and struggling with. And the graveyard of the past and the dead was the perfect place to live. A place where he could exist between life and death. A place that felt comfortable as he struggled with who he was and how he fit. Now, I could continue to unpack this passage, but I don't think you all want to stay here all day, and I could do it all day. So I'm going to jump through the rest of it to the end, which is the reason how come I chose this scripture, is because of that beginning point of healing. Because Jesus begins that healing process when he brings the traumas and demons out into the light where they can be seen in the swine. Jesus begins the process, and then the man wants to come with him. He wants to leave. He doesn't want to stay in this place with these people who have not come around him and supported him, but instead have isolated him and shackled him. And Jesus says, "No, you can't come with me. You have to go back to your friends. You have to tell them everything." That means not just the "I'm feeling great and I'm healed now," but that means telling his friends everything that has happened. And that's the beginning place of healing that Jesus gives him. And you hear it in the community, right? They're like, "Okay, Jesus, go. You need to leave now." And I think they would have been really happy if Jesus had taken this man with him, because he was not a very pleasant person for them. But even in this beginning stages of healing, if he stuck around, they were going to have to deal with him. They were going to have to listen to him. They were going to have to be a part of his healing. And community sometimes doesn't want to deal in that level of mess. But that's what Jesus called this person into and called the community into. Now, this scripture really is looking at moral injury from that military context. But I do want to throw a little interjection, and again, reminding you that those two pieces are not always intertwined. Military service and moral injury do not always go hand in hand, because moral injury is not a military thing. It is what happens to a person's soul regardless of the circumstances, when actions violate that base moral code. But since we are talking about the military and the trauma and issues around that, we do need to remember that the military isn't new. Throughout civilization, there has always been a warrior class. Our warrior class is the military and our police officers. And they're an important and vital part of our society. We need them to be strong. We need them to do the work and fight the battles that we as civilians either don't want to or are unable to fight. Now, in past cultures and in past times, and you've got to go back a ways to actually find it, but there was an understanding that warriors kill. That is a part of what we ask them to do. And killing goes against the morals that are embedded in society and embedded in the warrior's soul. And so when the battle is done and fought, and the warrior comes home, the community needs to be there. The community needs to come around and bring them back into community so that the warrior can be whole and the community can be whole. Now, something has shifted and happened over the course of time, and there has been a divide. Something has happened, and society has become less connected with what it is day in and day out that our military and our police do, what we ask them to do and what they experience. And so we end up with sort of these two weird worlds happening where we have a military world and a military life and a military understanding, and then we have a civilian world and a civilian way of life and a civilian understanding of the world, and a gap in between. And within that gap creates even more opportunity and possibility for moral injury as our military, as our police are more and more isolated and less supported and undergirded. So, we need to find ways to support our warriors, because a moral injury is not something that we can see. We can see someone with a broken arm. We know they need help. We can see someone with an amputated leg. We can't see someone who's walking around with a wound on their soul. But there are ways that we can help. But one of the reasons why this is so important is there is a lot of research going on around trauma, and one of the things that we have discovered that is when you experience a trauma, when a person experiences a trauma, their DNA is actually changed. The strands of DNA at the end become frayed. And if we don't find a way to heal that fraying, that wounded DNA gets passed on to the next generation, to the children and to the grandchildren. So if we don't find ways to come around and support and heal our traumatized people, we are actually carrying on trauma and wounding for generations and generations to come. So it is vital to find ways, to find pathways of healing and wholeness, not just for individual people, but for community now and for all of our future. Now, it is challenging for people who feel that they are suffering from this moral injury to get help, because they go in and they see their counselor, and like I said before, you know, we have quantified and qualified PTSD as a anxiety disorder, which if you'd like to talk to me about that, I will, because it's not an anxiety disorder. But there is a checkbox. You have this symptom and this symptom and this symptom. Yes, you have PTSD and we will treat you this way. But that's not moral injury. And so people go to get help, and the psychologist or the medical doctor says, I really don't know what's going on, I can't help you. And they turn away, even more rejected and more wounded and alone than before. Well, we are not psychologists, nor doctors, nor nurses, but we are church. And church is in the business of souls. We understand souls, we understand community, we understand healing. And so my dream is for church to find a way to be there, to support and to find pathways for healing and for wholeness. That is my dream. And I don't have enough time this morning to talk to you about how all of those dreams might be manifested, and so I invite you to continue this conversation. Whether you are still going, I really want to talk more about moral injury because I'm not really sure I understand how this works, Or, wow, I see a way that we might be able to help, that we might be able to support. And so this week I invite you to come back to church on Wednesday, 10 o'clock in the morning or 5:30 in the evening, and come talk. Come talk more about moral injury and about how we as church can help support and create pathways of hope and pathways of healing. Pray with me. God, thank you. Thank you for your example of Jesus and Jesus' healing ministry. Thank you that you have shown us that healing is possible, and that as your people we can participate in the healing of ourselves and others to help bring about whole humans, whole souls, and whole communities. May we feel it in our hearts and our bones and our souls, that moral compass that you have given us, so that we can love and support and heal.